Hi, Connor.
Hey
Thanks for
man, how you
joining us.
doing? Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, this is a segment we do called Quickies, where we sort of cram an entire career into around 15 minutes. So,
Easy.
we go as deep as possible in 15 minutes. So, I kind of want to start out with I know you were a theater kid, so let's start off there.
Sure.
Uh, Talk about your favorite theater kid memory and what were some of the stuff that you did then that you look back on and like, man, that really cooked.
Um, huh. I think, that there was something about my memories of like doing theater in New York and um, there really, just because I was young and I was just sort of starting as an actor, and I was too young to have, I think, a concept of like what a career was, or the idea that this is something I could do to make a living, or that I could like base my life around, or that it would pay my rent, or anything like that. It was just something I did for fun. And what came along with that was the sort of wonder that I could get a chance to do it. So not that I'm not always really excited and geeked when I get a role or I get an opportunity to do something. I am, thankfully, still. But at that time, it was just kind of it felt like something outside the like limits of normal life to kind
Yeah.
of go off and get to do that. Also, because I think very practically it meant I left school. So there was this thing of like, oh, I'm allowed to like it's so different that I can like not be educated in order to do this thing. Um, so I just have these memories of being able to step on stage and uh, yeah, and play pretend for 2 or 3 hours. What cooked? I did a production. It was sort of through my high school, but it was through a theater company run by a director at my high school. So I went to a theater school who's still a great friend of mine and a brilliant director named Greg Parenti in New York City. He had a theater company called the Strain Theater Company, and we did a production of Stephen Belber's Tape, which, if you don't know the
Ah,
play, is like a very, very dark play. We did
yeah.
it, we were all like 15 or 16, and we did it through his theater company, but we did it at the school. And to do that play at a high school for like was just, I remember doing that and being like, this doesn't fit in the normal school play thing. This is different, but we're doing it, and I'm glad we did. It was a good time.
That's a great play, and there's a weird Thai adaptation of it, a film adaptation that's coming out in like a month.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, I love that play. Yeah, that's a great choice. I love that you were 16 when you did it.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. Um, so, you started out as a theater kid, you were doing all these shows. What is the moment? Was there a specific moment when you realized you wanted to be a film actor, or was that just a gradual process?
No, it was sort of I didn't really see the separation, or I think at the time I didn't really know or didn't think too much about, well, I could do theater or I could do film or I'd stay in this. I was just like, man, whoever the fuck will hire me, like, cool, I'm 12. Um, so, and because I was lucky enough to, once I started working professionally, the first thing I ever did really professionally was a theatrical piece. I did a production of To Kill a Mockingbird. But then the next thing that I did was a film, was
Right,
Mystic River. So I
right.
immediately started working in film, and then I did TV last. So it all just sort of like it all just sort of I guess it just sort of progressed without me putting much thought into it. It was just sort of like, well, if you get a job, you do the job, and it's fun,
Yeah.
and again, it was, there was something sort of beautiful about the time before there was an awareness of like, okay, it's one thing to like get the film, but like, will it be a good film? Will people like the movie?
Right.
Will people like the movie and it's good, but will it be successful? Or will it be a disappointment? Or like, there are all these other considerations that show up, or will people like you or not like you? Or that now, unfortunately, whether or not I want to give them any breathing room still exist and I'm still aware of.
Yeah.
So there's a part of that lack of awareness that I miss because it's just a bit more free to be like, I don't know, man, I'm just here making something. Um,
Sure. And you mentioned Mystic River, but your first two feature film credits, let's just say, so you're young Kevin Bacon in Mystic River, you're young Colin Farrell in Oliver Stone's Alexander. So talk about what it's like being such a young actor on basically two sets filled with legends.
I think I think I was lucky in the sense that because those were my first film experiences, I don't know that I recognized that that was not normal, I guess, or
Right,
that not normal in the sense is like that's not those aren't the average film that gets made. Like most films don't have
right.
that type of support or money or size or like. So I think in my head it was just like, well, I guess this is what movies are. Cool.
Yeah,
Great. And I was certainly, yeah. And I knew enough about film. Thankfully, I have two parents who were brilliant and loved cinema. So I knew who Clint Eastwood was, and I knew who Sean Penn was, and I knew who Tim Roth's. Like I had seen everybody's work, and
right.
I was sort of a fan of everybody. But again, I was so I was so sort of just, I think, starstruck by the process of itself that I didn't really have time to be like, oh shit, and they're also movie stars. It was just sort of like anyone making movies it was sort of blew my mind. So I was just kind of in awe of the experience. But again, also like young enough to go with the flow, because that's what kids do. You don't have enough of
Right.
like a set idea of what life is supposed to be yet. So it's just easier to be a sponge and be like, well, I guess this is what life is now. Sure. So I was aware that all of the actors there were like a big deal, I guess. But
Yeah.
I guess I just assumed all actors were in some way.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that had to have been an interesting education too, in the sense of you're in Mystic River, this film that goes on to be this huge awards contender. It's this big deal film. And then you've got Alexander, which I think now we can look back and appreciate, especially with the director's cut. But back then was not a film that was particularly well
People
received
didn't love it.
financially or
No,
critically.
yeah, no.
Yeah, so you kind of had two right off the bat that were very diametrically opposed.
Yeah, yeah, I also, again, I think I, again, it's hard to, it's a long time ago, but I think I was aware, or I'm sure I was aware that public reception existed and that that mattered to art, and that if people didn't like the art you made, it was hard to make more of it.
Right.
But I think I think part of me assumed that people at that level, I sort of, I think it was just interesting to see like, oh, especially with Alexander, there can be all of this money and genuine passion. Because I can remember that, and I remember how much Oliver put into that, and how much he loved that character and what he put into that film, and how personal it was for him, and evidenced by the fact that he's released four versions of it to try to get
Right.
people to understand, like, trust me, there's some good shit here. Let me show you my vision. Um, that I think I was just surprised that that somebody could be that passionate, but also misaligned with where public perception was, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Because I
I
knew
feel like that's something that's followed Oliver Stone through a large chunk of his career. He's always a little bit ahead of where everybody else is.
absolutely. Well, yeah, I remember, yeah, I remember being, uh, that was around the time because Troy came out around that time as well, and I guess the
Yep.
studio were so terrified of the fact that Achilles is gay that they made Patroclus his cousin, and the first time
Right.
you see him, he's like in the middle of a threesome with two women. I remember seeing that and being like, oh wow,
Yep.
Oliver really he's on a different track than clearly what Hollywood is comfortable with. And good on him for just not being a coward. Um,
Absolutely. And so, you go from theater, you're in film, and then obviously a lot of people, of course, know you from Gossip Girl and from Revenge. I am someone who watched both of those shows, and I can only speak for myself. I felt like your characters did a little dirty on both of those shows. I feel like
Dirty.
I feel like they got done a little dirty. I feel like they got pushed out earlier than they should have in certain respects. But I'm curious. That's just me. That's a me opinion. So I'm curious. So what was it? What was it like? You're in television now. Maybe talk about what do you like or dislike about the television process versus the film process?
I think the difficulty that I had with television was the I guess disparate influences, right? You'd make a film and it is one creative team that is seeing the thing through from start to finish. And television can't really work like that unless it's a miniseries or, a very sort of unique project. But certainly on network TV, there is the people that created it, and then the showrunner who maybe didn't create it and sort of comes in later to manage things. And then every episode you're changing directors and you have different DPs, and the writing staff is maybe a dozen people, and everybody has a tiny little piece of it. And the only really consistent creative input are the actors. They're the only ones who are sort of there every episode all the time, but they regularly, because again of the way that network TV, the schedule it operates on, tend to not know what's happening until like a couple days before. You don't get your scripts until the last minute. Things are constantly changing. So I think that was just sort of a new experience for me, and not knowing and not always dealing with people that were going to be there to see, like, to work with a director who isn't going to be there at the end, and who
Yeah.
doesn't hasn't fallen in love with this world of these characters. They're there for a couple weeks. So I think that was sort of just a new experience, and something that I had to kind of learn. Um, and I think I also, like, I had never I look, obviously films are controlled by the money as well, but I'd never dealt with like studio notes, or that we'd be getting
Right.
notes from people about the way the show needed to be perceived for an imagined audience that weren't the creatives, where it was like, well, we need this, this, and this to happen because we have these demographics and we have to hit that. So I think television in certain ways made me aware of the fact that entertainment is a product as well, sadly. And that
Right.
wasn't something I was aware of in theater and film, even though they are. It just was less clear to me that we
Yeah.
are. And in television, you sell ad space, and like you have sponsors, or you have to sell advertising, and all of that just isn't as obvious in film. At least not. It is to producers, but not necessarily the actors. Certainly not to a young actor.
Yeah. I want to talk about genre cinema, because you've had a pretty decent track. I mean, starting with the Stakeland franchise, probably even before that, but definitely the Stakeland franchise. And then the last few years, there's been Fire Island, my buddy Fran's movie Last Stop in Yuma County, A Creature Was Stirring, Seance, which is on the festival circuit now, which is a
Mhm.
terrific film
Oh, thanks.
for folks who want to check that out. And then, of course, now Star People. So how intentional has that been? Were you a genre fan growing up? And if so, maybe talk about that a little bit. And it hasn't been intentional going that route, or is it just, you're getting really cool projects that come across your desk that happen to be genre films?
I think it's more the latter. I've certainly always been a fan of genre films. I I'm just drawn to good stories, and I like kind of weird shit. So I think genre movies, whether it's horror, sci-fi, or something in between, at least they have a larger bandwidth for strangeness.
Right.
And the boundaries of, or action, or what is reality. Your audience walks in there already expecting to see something maybe outside of their normal lives, so you can just stretch things a little bit more, and you can play with ideas that you might not be accepted in straight drama or comedy or something like that. But I guess my own personal philosophy, such that there is one, is that the characters are always unaware of genre. You know what I mean? Like, the
Right.
characters don't know they're in a horror movie, and they don't know they're in a comedy, and they don't know they're in a drama. To the characters, everything is a slice of life drama.
Right.
It's just their experience, and sometimes that involves aliens or serial killers, or supernatural things. But to them, that's not normal.
Yeah.
And even if it's something like Stakeland, where the world used to be normal, and now we're still meeting them at a time where they're like, yeah, there are vampires, and this is our life, and this is what we do. Um, so As much as I can, I try not to see the genre and I try to just see the character. Because again, that's also it's the only thing I have control over. Because I can
Right.
read a brilliant script that I think is just wonderful, and there is no story, there is no performance, there's no anything that can't be edited or shot or recut into a terrible film. They're just, you can make
Right.
anything bad and you can make things much better. So the only thing that I can do is know, well, I connect to this person and I can play these scenes authentically. That's really all I've got. Everything else is
Right.
just sort of, you got to cross your fingers and hope that it works out. And knowing that filmmaking is really hard and like a lot of times it's not going to work out. Like a
Yeah.
lot of times it's going to be like, okay, or maybe not very good, or like, because it's just hard to make great films. It's why they're special. Um,
Yeah. One of the genre films that you did in that period, which I'm just going to touch about briefly only because it's been, in a lot of people's heads right now, is a little film called Better Half. And I'm curious, have you been able to see Together yet?
I have not been able to see it yet, but I want to. It looks
You,
very good.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing right now where there is a lawsuit, which I'm not going to get into because it's a lawsuit, but evidently, I mean, there are some similarities between the two films. I was just curious if you had seen Together and if you and what and if you had any opinion on that whatsoever, and if not, that's okay too.
I wasn't aware of the legal stuff until after it had happened. Honestly, the whole thing just makes me sad. Uh,
Yeah,
no matter what way you look at it, it just is,
yeah,
it makes me sad. I know on anything to put a ton of work in as an artist and to either have that work challenged, or if you believe that work's been taken from you, or to be accused of something, like no matter what way you look at it, it's just awful. So yeah, I don't have
there's
any.
no winners. There's
There's
no
no
winners in
winners.
that situation.
I don't have any. Uh, I don't have any personal information. I was kept out of that
Oh,
process. I'm glad I
yeah,
was.
yeah,
And I just, I wish all filmmakers the best, and I wish them success in their film.
yeah.
And yeah, I just, yeah, it just sort of makes me sad.
They're both good films and they both stand alone, so hopefully people will check both of them out. I think
Yeah.
that's the takeaway from that. So let's talk about Star People to close out. So I want to know, and I saw it, I was incredibly impressed with how amazing that film looked and felt so much bigger than it was. And I'm curious, what drew you to the project? And talk about playing an influencer as someone who I don't think is particularly active on social media.
No,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, it's certainly a world that I'm not, the idea of self-promotion is, I probably to my own detriment, but not something that I've ever been able to feel comfortable with. I've just sort of, I think, made a deal with myself that I know that anytime I've tried to engage in social media, it just leaves me feeling deeply uncomfortable. So for better or for worse, I just take myself out of it because I'm not strong enough, and that's okay. But I think, but playing someone who is, and I just looked at Justin as a performer. He does a kind of performance art that
right.
isn't what I do, and I'm not someone who follows live streamers, but I recognize that as a performance art. And I think that, so I understand the drive to perform for people, and I understand the desire to share your interests with other people and hope that they enjoy it as much as you do. So I could understand elements of who Justin is. I think the challenge for me anyway was playing somebody who does those things, but isn't in my mind particularly attached to any of those things. Like Justin doesn't really have a driving perspective or philosophy that moves him. Justin has ideas about what might be popular, but to me, I've said this before, but if we use Claire as sort of our benchmark for what it looks like to really believe in this and to be willing to sacrifice and put yourself in danger in order to engage with this passion and this search, Justin does not come anywhere near that.
Right.
He's I think he's an element of audience capture. I think he's someone that stumbled in to extraterrestrial conspiracy stuff and found, oh, it's lucrative, or like, oh, there's a community here and like people accept me here. Okay, cool. I'll look into this. And oh, I saw, Bob Lazar talk about this, and I read this thing, and like this seems cool, and like Joe Rogan said this, and like that. Yeah, cool. I can get behind this, but I don't think it's something that motivates him. And I think that if Justin is still streaming today, I would wager he's not talking about UFOs, that he's moved on to something else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And I love the way you played him in the film. I think, to have a character like that, which is kind of straddles that line between being, really likable and relatable, but also being like, you know, a little grating at times with what he's doing. I think that's a nice balance that struck there. And yeah, I just thought the film was terrific. And
Oh,
you've got
thank
two great films out right now, that and Seance on the circuit. So, I mean, that's awesome. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. We crammed
you.
as much as we could in.
Yes, we did. I appreciate that, Billy Ray. Pleasure.
Absolutely.